So something was happening to David. He was on a serious learning curve. He went from the pasture, minding sheep, to the desert. Well, first to the battlefield with Goliath, and then the desert. From the desert to some more battlefields. And from that place, then to the palace. But it was like this steep learning curve. He was in God's waiting room, and he understood something about the waiting room of God. I don't know if you've ever been in a waiting room, where you go in for an appointment or something, you're in a waiting room and everybody's got their little magazines and stuff and they're kind of minding their own business, but everybody's playing a game inside. And then you get up when your name is called and you got that look of like triumph because you won and you're being called over and they move you to another waiting room, which is just smaller. And you wait some more. Sometimes waiting rooms can be tough. Sometimes a waiting room of God can be tough. David seemed to understand, though, that it wasn't wise to push things, but it's better to wait. In fact, he seemed to get an understanding well before Romans 8:28 was ever written that if you wait on God, he'll work things out for you for your good and for his glory. Romans 8:28 was one of those coffee cup verses that I memorized when I was like 20 years old from the King James Version, which was like, and the Lord worketh all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. What a great verse. Everything's going to work out together for my good. Woo! And then over the years, I began to realize that, I need to change how I view some of these things. Some of these verses like this, like 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. Sometimes I think that, if I just mind my P's and Q's, whatever that really meant, if I just did what was right, whatever that really meant, then things would work out good for me. Circumstances would be good for me, and that is not the case. In fact, Jesus promised that we're going to have trials and tribulation. But I used to think that, wow, it's going to work out for my good. And then I changed my definition of good to be more like what God's good is, which is what that verse means. He's going to work all things together for his good. We're called according to his purpose. In fact, what happened was I discovered the very next verse in Romans 8:29, which says this, that herein is God's purpose. You remember, you just read, called according to his purpose. Herein is God's purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Oh, we're being conformed, we're being carved, we're being shaped into the image of his Son. We're looking more and more like Jesus. How? Through desert times, through trials, through tribulations. He causes all these things to work together for good, right? So that we would become more like his Son. In fact, his Son would actually live more through us. So we go through these hard circumstances and we respond with the love of Jesus, or we respond with the grace of Jesus, we respond with the faith of Jesus, we respond with the forgiveness of Jesus, because even Jesus learned obedience through suffering. This is God's way. This is how he teaches us through these times that are known as desert times. I don't know if you ever prayed a desperate prayer like, oh God, do anything in me so that you can do anything through me. That's a great prayer. And it's a prayer that I really believe God will always answer. And he will begin to do things in you. In fact, how many people have prayed that kind of prayer and then found themselves all of a sudden in a desert place or in some tough circumstances? It's because God is working in us. His thing that he loves the most is his character, his glory in us, his character, the fruit of the Spirit, and more, just godly character. People think that it's all about just, things working together for your good. Woohoo, the rose garden. They forget that the rose garden is full of thorns. When I think of a rose garden, I'm thinking thorns, not just the flowery things. This is the loving hand of God, leading us through desert places, leading us through caves and barren places. David learned how to behave in the cave. He learned how to survive, how to find water, how to find friends. Remember all those guys that were called to him? Those who were in debt, discontented, and in distress? That's who became the mighty men of David. What a list. We'll talk about that maybe next time. But here David, he understood it's the Lord's timing. Hosea 2 verse 14 says, "Therefore behold," God speaking, "I will allure her," meaning Israel, "and bring her into the desert," or bring her into the wilderness places, so that I can speak tenderly to her. This is the way of God. So the next time you're in a tough spot, the next time you're in that waiting room or you're feeling desperate or in that desert place, remember how much God loved David. Remember how much God loved his son Jesus, who went through the desert and went through the cross for us. Remember all the godly characters of the Bible and what they went through. Remember all the silent times, and just wait for him. He will come through. He is faithful. You can trust him. He will answer you in his good and perfect timing.